right, let's go way back. Let's go back to the very early days of Ivan Parker. Now, we know you've had a great career in gospel music thus far, but it all had to start somewhere. And where did you first realize that you had this love, this fundamental love for Southern gospel music?
Wow. You know, actually, I grew up. My dad was a preacher. He pastored a lot of little small country churches around North Carolina. There were 7 of us kids, and of course, I was the baby of 7. But my older brothers and my dad loved gospel music. They loved quartets, and so as long as I can remember, they would buy these 33 and a third LPs, and that's what we listened to all the time. So as a little bitty thing, we would sit there and listen to the Statesmen, the Blackwood Brothers, and just all these different quartets and groups. And then I fell in love with the Oak Ridge Boys. I thought they were really cool because they had long hair, and they just sang that kind of music with the full band and all that. I just thought they were the coolest things. And then the Stamps Quartet with J.D. I fell in love with them. And so at a very young age, I guess it was being filtered into my life. And then probably around 13 years old, after hearing my brothers sing and hearing them make harmony, I'd be in the background singing along with them, learning harmony. Didn't even really realize what I was doing, but I was actually learning all the parts. And so at 13 years old, I think that was when I'm like, this is what I would like to do, and this is what I love to do. Never really thought that I would actually ever have the opportunity to go full time and do it. I just dreamed about it. And
As many people do.
oh, you know
Many
what?
people do.
I'm a perfect example of, if you're a young person, if you're a teenager, even younger than that, if it's in your heart and if you're dreaming about it, keep dreaming, because God will bless you to the point to where He will allow your dreams to come true. So I'm an example of all that, and I'm just thankful that I sold out to it, because I love it. I love gospel music.
Did you work any other kind of job besides singing?
I did. I actually worked in the insurance business for a little while.
Really?
I
Ivan
did.
Parker Insurance. Okay.
Well, yeah, kinda, sorta.
Kind of, sort of. Okay.
Well, I got into it, and then it just wasn't for me. When God calls you to do something, you can try and run from it. You can try to do other things and just fill that spot. And whether it's gospel music or whether it's a worship leader in your church, if God's called you to do this, nothing else is going to make sense.
That's the truth.
And that's honestly the way this whole thing came about. I did insurance business for a while, and then I went to work for an advertising firm.
Really?
There in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that's actually what I was doing when the Singing Americans, Mr. Ed Hill, called and said, "We heard that you're a pretty good singer," and I said, "Well, maybe."
All right.
I'm
Well,
glad
I
that-
tell you, I'm glad you brought up the Singing Americans, but I just want to tell our cameraman, make sure you go back, and when you do all the editing on this, go back and put Ivan Parker Insurance. Call 800-555-1212.
Right.
That's 800-555-1212, and he'll take care of all your insurance needs. Now,
We're all used to
Or find somebody that will.
Ivan Parker who looks like he looks today. But I'm glad he mentioned
Oh,
the
you
Singing
didn't do
Americans.
this.
We did.
we did.
Look at that.
There's the Singing Americans with the clean face, young Ivan Parker.
All right, Ivan, let's just jump off there and ask the question. How old were you there?
Oh my goodness! I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think I think I was around 23,
Okay.
about 23 years old.
Yeah, that group
That brings
there,
back memories.
that group brought us songs like Whiter Than Snow.
Yep.
Can you think of a couple others?
Yeah, there was actually a song, one of the first ones that Savannah Faust, Cathedrals used to do a lot of her songs, and she sent a song called "Somebody Touched Heaven for Me," and I sang that one.
And you were
Incredible.
featured.
Yeah,
Yeah.
incredible song, wonderful.
I think a lot of people would like to see a young, clean-shaven, no mustache Ivan Parker.
Well, they wouldn't like
Just-
me now.
Just for trivia. Just for trivia.
All right. Well, while we've got the picture here, let's just. Of course, Ivan's right there right there, and then you probably recognize this guy. That's Danny Funderburk.
Yep,
Who
that's him.
spent a few years with a little group called the Cathedrals, and,
Yeah.
and later on Perfect Heart, and now doing solo work. Ed Hill is over here next to Ivan. Of course, Elvis. When Elvis was alive, and the Stamps were touring with him. Ed was the man who's always said Elvis has left the building. But what most people don't really remember is that Ed was probably one of the best baritones to come along in gospel music,
Oh,
and sang for
totally.
years with the Prophets, of course, the Statesmen, not Statesmen, but the Stamps, and then Singing Americans. And in fact, it wasn't too long after this picture is when Ed had the bus wreck, if I'm not mistaken.
right.
And the world kind of changed a little bit for them. Were you on the bus at that point?
I was.
You were. All right. Well, since we've got there, let's talk a little. Let's talk about it. We'll get to the rest of these guys in just a second.
Lord, we need to put this all in a book. I even have people all the time saying, "Wow, you have had the most interesting career. You've gone from here to where you are today with the Gaither Homecoming, and just you've done so many things." God has really put me in a lot of strategic places, and there's some places that I have wound up. I don't know that God was in it or not, but being on the bus that day, the bus wrecked. I'm not sure that was one of those chosen places or not. But that whole thing was it was just kind of interesting how all that happened, because Danny Funderburk, he had called in that week sick. He had pneumonia, and so he was not going to be able to go. So a lot of people know the tenor that sang with Squire Parsons and the Hoppers for a while, Greg Bentley. Ed Hill called Greg and said, "Hey, we need you to fill in, spur of the moment." He didn't know any of the songs, but we were headed down to Georgia, and Ed was driving, and I was sitting back at the booth, and we were going down one of those Georgia roads that had the 2 lanes going each way and then a center turn lane. Well, a log truck had gotten in the center lane, wanted to turn left, and whenever he turned left, the logs came out in front of the bus, and we hit them. And so as soon as it happened, I mean, it just, it just shocked you. You were like, "Oh my Lord, what just happened?" And of course the bus veered off. We went through this poor old farmer's fence, went right through his front yard, and all I knew to do, the bus was out of control, and so all I knew to do was lay down in the seat and push my feet against the seat in front of me and just hold on. I was actually laying down, looking out the window, watching the trees
Wow.
go by as we were going through that man's yard. And the only thing that saved us was after we got through the man's yard, we went into a freshly plowed field. And when the bus went out into that loose dirt, it just slowed it down and stopped it. And it was that was one of those times that I wouldn't want to repeat for nothing.
Sure.
And Ed was injured,
Oh yeah.
driving the bus. He was injured.
And Ed was injured, and when the bus came to a stop, I jumped up and to check on Ed, and he was sitting sideways in the driver's seat, and he was, of course, he was out, and So I got one of the other guys to come help me to pick him up out of the driver's seat to lay him down, and when we did that, we saw his leg. Oh, that was rough, and